Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the series of Heart Smart, where we're going to look at all things cardiovascular health and really trying to keep your heart healthy. So my name is Nick Tennant. I'm an on-site health educator in the Jacksonville Wellness Office. So if you're joining us from Jacksonville, you probably know me. But welcome to all those joining from Gainesville and the surrounding areas as well. This is really a six-part series, really to tackle, like I said, everything cardiovascular health. We'll go into all the different pertinent topics that will really affect your heart health, and then we'll answer any questions that you have going throughout the program. So when we look at the series as a whole, it's going to take place each week. So every Thursday for the next 6 weeks. And all the classes will be at noon. So if for whatever reason you cannot attend any of the classes, they will be recorded and available on demand. So you'll have the opportunity to watch them at a later time, a more convenient time if that is. We do encourage you to watch it live if you're able to. I think you get the most out of the program that way, but don't fret if you can't make one of them. Just make sure to go back and watch the recording. So after each class, we'll send up a follow-up email. It'll have a copy of the presentation that we go over, a link to the video. So if you didn't have a chance to watch it, you can watch it then. And then we'll also include a link to complete a post-class assessment. So don't worry about it's open book for the post-class assessment. So it's only going to be about 4 to 5 questions long, each of them. But they're really tackling what you learned in each presentation. And what we do for that is we track our participation that way. So we're unable to really track who watches it on demand or who's watching it live or who comes in and out of the Zoom presentation throughout the day. So this is a great way for us to be able to track our participation. So for our Jacksonville folks, those looking for wellness credit points, this will be 100 points towards your wellness credit. So remember to answer each of those post-class assessments. So if we get all 6 of your post-class assessments, you'll qualify for those 100 points. Our folks in Gainesville, check with your wellness office as whether or not this is rewardable or if you can self-report it for some points. However, please do go ahead and still fill out that post-class assessment, as again, this is a way to help gauge our participation rates. So today, when we're just going to take a closer look at heart disease, an overview of heart disease and stroke, how prevalent it really is in today's society. Next week, you'll be joined with Karan Robinson talking about the science behind habit formation. The following week, John, who is our employee wellness manager as well as a registered dietitian, will go over nutrition and weight control as it applies to heart health. The following week, we'll talk about using medications wisely with Rachel Carloni, who's a pharmacist. So if you have any questions about different medications that you may be on, there's a great time to pick her brain. The following week, we'll be talking about stress and taming our stress dragon. So how much does stress impact our heart and what happens in our body when we're constantly stressed out? And then finally, we'll be going over physical activity, kind of going over some myths and rethinking what we consider physical activity and setting those SMART goals in the final class. And then at the end of the program, you'll have the opportunity to meet up one-on-one with a health coach. Any of us that you hear from throughout this course would be more than happy to meet with you one-on-one. If you're in Gainesville, I'm sure the wellness office there as well would be more than willing to meet with you one-on-one if you prefer someone in your city. All right, so without further ado, I want to go ahead and get started. And we're going to start by what I want you to do is utilize that chat function in the Zoom, and we're going to talk about myths or facts. So I want you to go ahead and type into chat whether or not you think each of the following statements is a myth or a fact. So the first one is your heart needs 1 straight hour of exercise every day. Do you think that's a myth or a fact? Your heart needs 1 straight hour of exercise every day. Give everyone a second to answer here. Thank you for participating. So that is actually a myth. So physical activity, while it is key, right? And you don't need 1 solid hour each day. So we're looking at getting about 30 minutes of moderate physical activity. And that can be things like gardening, walking, yoga, a leisurely bike ride. And we're looking to do those 30 minutes at least 5 days a week. Okay. Or you can do activities of 25 minutes of more vigorous moderate level, instead of the moderate level, more vigorous activity level, things like running, swimming, basketball, 3 days a week. And you can even break up these segments into like 10 to 15 minutes. So if you can't get 30 minutes in at one time, you can break it up into 3 10-minute segments if you wanted to. But we're really aiming to at least get 30 minutes of moderate physical activity at least 5 days per week. All right, the next myth or fact: your heart stops beating when a heart attack strikes. Is that a myth or a fact? Your heart stops beating when a heart attack strikes. Think that's a myth or a fact? Looks like we got a smart audience here. That is a myth. So during a heart attack, the heart is almost always still beating. But what happens is that blood supply to it actually gets blocked. So as a result, it doesn't get enough oxygen, which then can injure the heart. So when your heart suddenly stops beating, it's called cardiac arrest. So good job. All right, next myth or fact: fiber can lower your cholesterol. Is that a myth or a fact? What do you think? Fiber can help lower your cholesterol. And you are correct. That is a fact. It lowers your bad cholesterol. And it may help prevent heart disease, obviously, as a effect of that. So fiber comes from things like our plants, so our whole grains, our fruits, our vegetables and beans. So it's usually best to get your fiber from foods, which also have many other great nutrients, instead of just from taking a supplement. And John will go over a lot of this in the nutrition portion of this program. All right, next myth or fact: heart disease kills more women than breast cancer. Is that a myth or a fact? Heart disease kills more women than breast cancer. Looks like we got a smart audience. I tell you, it is a fact. So heart disease is the #1 killer of women in the United States, killing more women than all forms of cancer combined. So if we look at the statistics, 1 in 3 women die of heart disease, while 1 in 31 die of breast cancer. So heart disease not only is the #1 killer, also very much more prevalent as well. All right, next myth or fact: you get high cholesterol just because of what you eat. Is that a myth or a fact? High cholesterol just because of what you eat. And if you're like me, you're using that context clues of just, and you would be correct. It is a myth. So many things affect your cholesterol level, as you'll see throughout this presentation. Your genes definitely play a role in that, but you still have to have a lot of control, especially with our food choices, right? So Heart Smart, we're going to give you these tools. We'll educate you on the key nutrition principles for heart health. All right, next myth or fact: you should cut back on salt more than fat for heart health. Is that a myth or a fact? Cut back on the sodium more than the fat for heart health. Is that a myth or a fact? It's a myth or a fact. All right, it is a fact. So too much salt is linked to high blood pressure, as well as heart disease and stroke. So remember, a lot of the sodium that we're eating comes from processed foods and restaurant fare. When you go out to eat, they pack it with sodium because they want it to taste good. They want you to crave it again and eat more of it. So again, they're going to pack it with a lot of salt. So regarding fat, a calorie balanced diet with heart healthy fat can be good for the heart. And like I said, when John goes over the nutrition portion of the program, you're going to see a lot of that. But as speaking from someone who has hypertension, they'll sneak salt into about everything they can, obviously, to make it good, taste good. All right, next myth or fact: being obese is the biggest risk factor for heart disease. Is that a myth or a fact? Being obese is the biggest risk factor for heart disease. So we have some varied answers here. That is actually a myth. So sitting on your couch may be the worst thing you can do for your heart. So being physically inactive. So according to the CDC report, 40% of Americans are at risk for heart disease because they are physically inactive. Now, close behind is your obesity. So 34% are at risk due to obesity. The other most important risk factors, and we'll go over them in this presentation, but are uncontrolled high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and smoking. But when we're looking at the most prevalent risk factor, that is physical inactivity. All right, myth or fact: to lower your chances of heart disease, even non-drinkers should drink red wine. Is that a myth or a fact? Got some varied answers again. That is a myth. While I enjoy red wine myself, many recent studies have suggested that red wine may lower the risk of getting heart disease. But if you don't drink, you shouldn't start drinking just because of it. The benefits don't outweigh the negative health risks of alcohol, which include high blood pressure, stroke, and obesity. So if you do consume drinks, if you drink, the American Heart Association suggests no more than 2 drinks per day for men and one per day for women. And no, as much as we'd like to bank those drinks to the weekend, we cannot bank the days that we don't drink and then add those to the weekend days. So two drinks per day for men and 1 for women is what the American Heart Association suggests. All right, so I thank you for participating along in that portion. So let's meet our heart. So if you ball up your hand into a fist, just curl it and clench your fist, that's about the size of your heart. All right, and the heart works like the pump of the body. So what it does is it has 4 chambers. The upper chambers of the heart are the left and right atriums, and the lower 2 chambers are called the left and right ventricles. So it has these 4 chambers, and it pumps approximately 2,000 gallons of blood each day. That's a lot of blood getting pumped from the heart. And so when we talk about normal heart function, the task of your heart is to pump enough blood to deliver a continuous supply of oxygen and other nutrients to the brain and other vital organs. So this, as it's pumping and delivering these vital nutrients and supply of oxygen, this allows you to complete all your normal functions throughout your day. So the pumping rates of your heart will also change throughout the day. You'll notice this. So when your heart rate speeds up, you're probably exercising, you're stressed, you're excited, or maybe you just had a cup of coffee. It's speeding up to meet the fuel needs of your body. So when you're calm, you're relaxed, you're in this relaxed state, your heart rate will come down. All right, and we'll go into those elevated heart rates too in the stress portion of our program, and why chronic stress really needs to be looked at when we talk about heart disease. Now, atherosclerosis is the buildup of fats and cholesterol and other substances in and around your artery walls. All right, so if you look at the right-hand side of your screen here, and with those cell linings and those vessel openings, when you have a normal look there, you don't see any plaque buildup at all. Now, when you talk about early injury, you'll see just along that vessel opening, you'll see this beginning cholesterol plaque start to form. Now, when we look at significant atherosclerosis, you'll see it in an advanced state where it's almost blocking the entire opening. Now, when we get that complete blockage, that's when we have blood clots form. And the thing to remember here is typically no symptoms. You won't have any symptoms until an artery is so narrow to clog that it can't supply adequate blood to your organs and tissues. So this builds up over many years and can begin at a very, very early age. So remember, we're trying to take these steps that we learn in this program, program throughout the next 6 weeks, and really apply to make some behavior changes in our lives. Now, you should have, I'm not going to show this video, but you should have received this in a link in the email to go ahead and watch. It is a promo that Elizabeth Banks did for Go Red for Women, the signs and symptoms to look out for when you're having a heart attack, right? Most of us aware that we have symptoms like chest pain, right? But there are some other symptoms that may not be as known or as widely talked about that I think she does a great job in this video really talking about. So if you didn't get a chance to watch and you still have that welcome email, go back and click that link and watch it. If not, we'll also follow it up and include it in our follow-up email as well. Now, turning to our attention to stroke, this is a disease that affects the arteries leading to and within the brain, right? So it's the leading cause of disability in the United States. When we talk about heart disease and stroke, you're talking about two really prevalent factors in the United States. And it occurs when a blood vessel to the brain is either blocked by a clot or bursts. So what happens here is the brain cannot get the blood and oxygen it needs. So it and the brain cells die. All right. So when we look at how prevalent these things are in the United States, well, these numbers are in the United States, the leading causes of death per 100,000. So if you look at the number one, it's heart disease, right? So heart disease in 2020 claimed double the lives that COVID claimed. So we know how much COVID has impacted us in the healthcare industry. So heart disease actually claimed double the amount of lives that COVID did in the United States in 2020. You see stroke is also on this list. But when we look at the leading causes of death, you don't hear heart disease talked about as much, right? So this is something that, again, it affects a lot of people. And when we look at where in the United States it affects people the most, we can look at this heat map and you can see in the southeastern part of the United States, that's where it's really prevalent, right? That's where we are too. So there's a lot of factors that can go into that. Why it's so prevalent in the southeastern part of the United States. And while death rates have decreased over the year, they still remain high in the Southeast and the highest in the Southeast. So from 2008 to 2018, the annual death rate attributable to heart disease declined 27.9%. And that actual number of deaths declined almost 10%. But that burden and those risk factors still remain high. So while we're starting to see a slight decline and a decline in the overall death rate, those risk factors, that prevalency is still there. So when we look at cardiovascular disease as a whole, between 2015 and 2018, almost 127 million American adults had some form of cardiovascular disease. Between 2016 to 2017, direct and indirect costs of cardiovascular disease were over $363 billion. All right, so that's a lot of money. It's a lot of people affected by cardiovascular disease. And if we take it outside of the United States, it is the leading global cardiovascular disease is the leading global cause of death and accounted for approximately 18.6 million deaths worldwide in 2019. So that's a lot of people are affected by this. So we definitely want to look out for risk factors, things, actionable items that we can take and things that behavior changes we can make in our lives. So what are the risk factors for heart disease? Well, we may be familiar with some of them, but we may not, as you heard me mention, you may not have known that the most common one is physical inactivity, right? So focus on the risk factors you can change, the ones that are in that box right there. Genetics and our age will play a role too. So if you had a first degree relative, let's say a father or a mother or a sibling who has had a heart attack or has needed stents or bypass surgery at a young age. So we're looking at younger than 55 for a man or younger than 65 for a woman, then that is considered a higher risk for developing heart disease. And we look at age as a factor. Men that if you're age 45 or older and women age 55 and older are more likely to have a heart attack than the younger men and women. So some factors that relate specifically to women that can affect women a little bit more disproportionately include relatively high testosterone levels during or prior to menopause, increased hypertension during menopause, autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, which is more common in women than in men, stress and depression, also more common among women, and then low risk factor awareness. So lack of recognition that a lot of the above conditions are risk factors for heart disease. And not having that knowledge that these are risk factors is a risk factor in and of itself. When we look at things that we can really change and really have control over, or at least can monitor and manage, we're talking about our high blood pressure. So it's going to the doctor regularly, taking our medications regularly, high blood lipids, things that we can do to reduce those, smoking. So talking about cessation, diabetes, if we're a person with diabetes, being able to better control that, going to our doctors regularly. Again, physical inactivity, we saw how prevalent it was, and it's one of the most common risks. It is the most prevalent risk factor for heart disease. obesity, taking care of our weight and being mindful of our weight control. Stress, which is again, I think one very important one, that we get out of that chronic stress, that tense state. Remember, our heart rate is elevated when we're doing that. And then our poor diet choices, right? So we're going to tackle pretty much all of these topics in this box right here, so that we're going to give you that knowledge to really take on and make some behavior changes based off these risk factors. So how prevalent are these risk factors? So if you look on down the list, smoking in adults, about 15.5%. We look at obesity in adults, we're hovering just underneath 40%. When we look at high cholesterol, or that LDL, really that bad, quote unquote, bad cholesterol of equal or greater to 130, we're looking at 28.5%. Hypertension, again, just under 46%. But if you scroll down all the way down to the last one, that recommended exercise, 22.5% get the adults get the recommended amount of exercise. So that means that more than 75% of Americans do not get the recommended level of physical activity each day. So that is a significant, that's over 3/4 of our population are not getting the recommended amount of exercise each day. So the prevalency in that, you can see that our physical inactivity is the most prevalent risk factor. We talk about our lipid levels and our cholesterol. So we have our HDL, the high density lipoprotein. This is the quote unquote good cholesterol, makes up 20 to 30%. And its job is moves the cholesterol from the arteries to the liver. So when we look at our HDL and what we should be targeting, we're looking at over 60. All right, that's what our HDL numbers, generally desirable level. Our LDL, this is the main form of our bad cholesterol, right? It makes up 60 to 70% of our total cholesterol. So when we talk about risk factors, that high cholesterol, that LDL is what we're talking about. That causes that buildup of plaque that we went over inside of the arteries. So when we look at our desirable level of LDL, we're trying to keep it under 100. All right, and then lastly, our VLDL, that's that very low density lipoprotein. It makes up about 10 to 15%. It is one of the main forms of bad cholesterol, and it's a precursor to LDL. All right, so when we look at our total cholesterol, we're trying to keep it under 200, and our triglycerides under 150. Now, there are some pre-existing conditions like diabetes and other risk factors that may change your target levels, that you may have to work with your doctor that may know those levels better for you, your target levels. But generally speaking, these are the target levels if you don't have any of those pre-existing conditions. As an important announcement for our Jacksonville folks, Gainesville, I think you have screenings either ongoing or just had them, but our Jacksonville folks, we are going to start biometric screenings earlier this year. All right, so we'll be communicating about the dates shortly, but we'll have a date at the end of June. We'll have a couple more in July and in August. So we're going to get started earlier this year, give you guys a chance to go out, get your numbers. It's a great way to get your numbers checked. It's free. Obviously, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes. They'll give you your numbers, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, all that will be there for you that you can take home with you. So I hope you're going regularly to your regular physician, your primary care physician, seeing your doctors regularly, but this is also a great way to get those health checkup and get those numbers we just went over. So more information about when those biometric screenings will be coming, we should put out some information soon. All right, and if you look at this graph right here, when we talk about our cholesterol levels, our LDL especially, remember that's that bad cholesterol, right? If you basically, a take-home message from this graph is the higher your LDL, the greater your risk of atherosclerosis and then subsequent heart disease. So you really want to take control of managing your cholesterol levels. Remember, it's not the only risk factor or the most prevalent, but it is a risk factor. So we want to take control of our LDL, really help to reduce those LDL levels. When we look at our blood pressure and what we should be targeting, based off the American Heart Association, normal blood pressure is less than 120 over 80, less than 120 and less than 80. When we look at just slightly elevated, it's 120 to 129 over less than 80. Now, if you're in the high blood pressure range, hypertension, 130 to 139 over 80 to 89. Hypertension stage 2, you're 140 or higher to over 90 or higher. And then if you're in hypertensive crisis, which you should see your doctor immediately, that's higher than 180 and or, so either or, higher than 120. All right, and I can tell you how important. I was one of those males that, never went to their doctor, didn't have a primary care physician, went to a health screening, and my blood pressure was severely elevated, right? So now I've been able to, I never knew I had high blood pressure because hypertension is known as the silent killer. So if you have high blood pressure, it's important to notice it. It's important to talk to your doctor and get any home measurements that may be the best option for you. Peter Drucker says it best: what gets measured gets managed, right? So we go ahead, and that's why I think those health screenings are so important. Going to your doctors are so important. When you measure something, you can help manage it, right? So I've been able to help manage my hypertension because I realized I had it, and I took the steps necessary to help manage it. When we look at BMI, the big thing to remember here is BMI is a useful tool, but it's not the only thing. It's not the end all be all. So you can still have a higher BMI and still be healthy, right? So muscle mass and things like that can go into BMI. So unless you are an athlete, we're looking at a BMI of greater than 30 is where we start to get concerned. So you can do your calculation based off this graph here. So your BMI is a person's weight in kilograms divided by his or height in meters squared. All right, but we did the conversion on this table for you. So you have the feet in inches and weight in pounds. But the other thing, where you carry your weight also matters. So that's why we included waist circumference. So that's helpful to know too. And that's the measurement taken around the abdomen, just at the level of the belly button. So when we look at high risk for waist circumference, men greater than 40 inches, non-pregnant women greater than 35 inches. So I wouldn't get too hung up on your BMI. Remember, if it's when it's greater than 30 is where we really start to get concerned. All right, how many of you have heard of this phrase? You probably have heard it a million times. Knowledge is power, right? You've heard this expression, and you've heard it said over and over. And how many of us believe it, right? We've been told knowledge is power our entire lives, basically about everything. But what we like to say is knowledge is not the power. The ability to act on the knowledge is the power. So acting on knowledge provided is the key to health. We can provide you with the tools. We can coach you along the way. We can give you that knowledge throughout this program. But remember, that choice is yours. That choice to change your habits, make behavior changes, that choice is yours. So you have that power, right? So acting on that knowledge is your power. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind as we go throughout the rest of this program. And especially next week when Karan will talk to you about the science behind habit formation, why it can be so difficult to make some of those changes and what we can do to help. So I thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you will join us again next week. And again, we're here each week for the next 6 weeks. As a reminder, we will be sending out a copy of this presentation as well as a link to complete the post-class assessment. In addition to a link to the video. So if you want to watch it again, or if you only caught some of it, you missed part of it, you'll have the option to watch it on demand as well. All right, I thank everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.